So you've probably seen the headline that Trump's budget is going to gut the CFPB. So I decided to look into this and see if that is in fact the case. Now, what I found seems pretty straightforward because the current budget of the CFPB is clearly outlined, and if you look at the CFPB's annual report, you can see exactly where the money is going. So here's how it breaks down. The CFPB receives transfers from the Federal Reserve System. So per Dodd-Frank, the CFPB can ask for those funds up to the cap from the Fed, and the Fed cannot deny the funds provided the funds don't exceed the cap. Now there is one caveat, and this seems so government of them. The CFPB in any given year can ask for an additional $200 million that the Fed board has to give them. Now in the past, the CFPB said they're not going to use that money, nor will they exceed the cap. But when you look at what Trump's proposed budget is going to do to the CFPB, that may change. So here's how it breaks down. The budget cap for 2016 is $631.7 million. For 2017, it's $646.2 million. And for 2018, it's $663 million. And remember again, you can ask for an additional $200 million if you want to. Any additional funds that the CFPB would want would have to be approved by the Fed. This is where it gets interesting. The funds from the CFPB that I just outlined, as I said, comes from the Federal Reserve. And the Fed's spending is not part of the congressional budget. That's part of the problem here, guys. Because the CFPB does not get congressionally approved funds, it gives the CFPB the opportunity to tell Congress to go F off, and Congress really can't do anything about it. Now, how this has transpired over the past 5 years is the CFPB can simply ignore congressional requests. And if you believe some of your senators, that's exactly what the CFPB has done. Because if they don't want to disclose something, they don't. And they do so without any care whatsoever because all of their money comes from the Federal Reserve. So now Trump has, just decided to make the CFPB part of the budget as it's outlined on the second to the last page of the budget that he just released. Now, can he do this legally? I really don't know. But let's say he can, and let's say the budget passes the House and the Senate. What would happen to the CFPB? So here's basically everything on the CFPB in the Trump budget. I told you, very light on details. So for 2018, what we do is take the budget of the CFPB that we already know is $663 million, and we subtract $145 million from that. That means the operating budget of the CFPB would actually go down to $518 million. Surely an amount they can work with if they, get their pay in line with other comparable civil servant jobs. Because did you know the CFPB pays their employees more than other comparable government positions? Quite a bit more. Why do they do this? Well, remember, they're not on a congressional budget, so they can do whatever the hell they want. Now, here's where it gets tricky. We don't have a figure for the CFPB's Fed funding cap for 2019, but if we stink eye this thing over the past 4 years, we can draw a fairly close number. Now, in the past, their funding went from $630, $645 to $663, so I'm going to estimate that the 2019 budget of the CFPB is going to be somewhere around $685 million. So if in 2019 the Bureau gets $685 million, Trump's fiscal 2019 numbers in his budget is that amount less $650 million. Now that means the Bureau would have an operating budget of about $35 million or a whopping $483 million less than they had in the previous year. And that, my friends, is not going to keep the doors open. Okay, so let's take this to 2020, which is really the nail in the coffin for the CFPB. We've looked at 2018 and 2019. Now in 2020, if the CFPB maintains its budgetary increases, then we can assume that budget from the Fed would be somewhere around $710 million. Now when we combine that with Trump's budget, it would be $710 million less $683 million, which would leave the CFPB only $27 million to operate on, $8 million less than the previous year, and $491 million less than 2018. So as you can tell, Trump's budget, which just came out, is absolutely intended to gut and get rid of the CFPB. Now, you could be saying to yourself, well, the CFPB can live off its enforcement actions. After all, they've recovered nearly $12 billion. And surely they can keep some of that money. Now, here's what I found. When agencies like the Department of Justice fine a company, very little of that money goes back to anybody in the form of restitution. For example, in 2011, the Department of Justice took in $2 billion in fines. Of that money, only $116 million went to restitution, which leaves a little less than $1.9 billion to go back to the Treasury because that's where fines from the DOJ goes, to the Treasury. Now with the CFPB, they've gotten nearly $12 billion. Now that money goes to the CFPB's Civil Penalty Fund, which is held in a bank in New York. I can't remember what the name of it is. So from there, the money is distributed to victims of that enforcement action, and the amount is determined by how much a CFPB got versus how bad the consumer was harmed. Vague? You bet you. And if there's any funds left over, the CFPB can use those funds from the CFPB's website for future allocations. So could those future allocations of funds gotten from enforcement actions be used to fund or offset the losses the Bureau is going to realize if Trump's budget goes through? It's possible. But the real question is, how much money would that amount to? And facing a shortfall of over $500 million, leaving the Bureau basically without a budget whatsoever, they'd have to keep a ton of money and they'd have to increase their enforcement actions. And this brings me to my final point. In Trump's budget, he states restructuring the CFPB to refocus its efforts on enforcement and enacted consumer protection laws is a necessary first step to scale back harmful regulatory impositions and prevent future regulatory hurdles that stunt economic growth and ultimately hurt the consumer that CFPB was originally created to protect. Furthermore, subjecting the reformed agency to the appropriations process would provide the oversight necessary to impose financial discipline and prevent future overreach of the agency into consumer advocacy and activism. And that's right from the budget. And what it means is the president doesn't want as many enforcement actions, that the CFPB with its current bloated budget has too many overreaching enforcements as it is. Further, the current director is not going to be there next year. He's done even if he doesn't get canned. And the new director will not be looking at enforcement actions as broad-ranging as we've seen under Cordray. So again, the prospect of the CFPB going out and making its own money is highly unlikely. Now, when you combine that with the Trump budget, again, if it goes through, you'd have to conclude that this would put the CFPB completely out of business.